Every neighborhood has that one person who thinks they own the place. The kind of person who stomps around like they're the mayor, making everyone's life miserable. In our quiet suburban community, that person was Linda. Linda was the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac, a woman who believed her property extended far beyond her own yard. She was the kind of neighbor who would complain about the height of your grass while her own lawn looked like a jungle. She was the kind of person who would park her massive SUV in front of your driveway just to make a point. And she was the kind of person who thought the rules didn't apply to her. For years, the neighborhood tolerated her antics. We all knew she was a nightmare, but no one wanted to confront her. She had a way of twisting situations to make herself the victim, and she had the HOA wrapped around her finger. But everything changed when she crossed the line with me. It started small. I'd find a few cracked driveway lights after she backed out of her driveway. At first, I assumed it was an accident. I even replaced them without making a fuss, thinking, hey, mistakes happen. But then it kept happening. Over and over, almost like clockwork. Every few weeks I'd step outside and see yet another set of lights shattered. It wasn't until I caught her in the act one morning that I realized this wasn't an accident. I was sipping coffee by my window when I saw her pull out of her driveway in her giant, obnoxiously oversized SUV. She rolled right over my driveway lights without hesitation, no pause, no glance back, just a clean, entitled crush. I was fuming. I decided to confront her, walking over just as she stepped out of her vehicle. Hey, Linda, I said, keeping my voice calm. I think you might have run over my driveway lights. She barely looked up from her phone, adjusting her sunglasses as if the conversation was already beneath her. Oh, those little things. They were in my way. I blinked. In your way? They're not even close to your driveway. You do realize those are on my property, right? Linda sighed, clearly annoyed at being forced into a conversation that didn't revolve around her. Well, maybe if you didn't put them so close to the curb, I wouldn't have to run them over. You should probably move them. I clenched my jaw. I wanted to argue, but I knew arguing with Linda was like arguing with a wall, useless and frustrating. I tried to be diplomatic. Look, I'm just asking you to be careful. These aren't cheap to replace. Linda gave a fake laugh, waving a dismissive hand. Oh, please. You can afford it. Besides, they're ugly anyway. I'm doing you a favor. With that, she turned on her heel and strutted inside her house, leaving me standing there, seething. I looked at the broken remains of my driveway lights and realized something. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't carelessness. This was a power move. She did it because she could, because she knew the HOA would back her up, and because, in her mind, her convenience was worth more than my property. That's when I knew this wasn't over. I wasn't the type to cause trouble, but I also wasn't going to sit back and let Linda treat my property like her personal obstacle course. So, like any reasonable person, I decided to go through the proper channels first. I tried talking to her again, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd have a shred of decency hidden beneath that smug exterior. Linda, I really need you to stop running over my lights, I said the next time I saw her. She barely looked up from watering her already dead potted plants. Did we already have this conversation? She said with a bored sigh. Yes, and you're still doing it. Linda gave a dramatic eye roll. Well, maybe if your little lights weren't in my way, I wouldn't have to. I pinched the bridge of my nose, taking a deep breath to keep from losing my temper. They're not in your way. They're on my property. Just stay on your driveway, and this won't be a problem. Linda smirked and shrugged. Not my fault if they're in my blind spot. Blind spot. Was she serious? Instead of arguing, I decided to take it up with the HOA, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd actually do something about it. That was my first mistake. The meeting was a joke. The HOA president, an older man named Greg who practically worshipped Linda, listened to my complaint with the same level of enthusiasm as someone forced to watch paint dry. Well, Mark, Greg said, rubbing his temples like I was personally ruining his day. We can't control how people drive. Maybe you should consider moving the lights. My hands clenched into fists. They're not in the way. They're literally on my property. How is this my problem? Greg sighed dramatically. Look, we have to keep the peace in the neighborhood. Maybe just compromise. I stared at him. Compromise with someone who's destroying my property? Greg gave a non-committal shrug. It's just driveway lights, Mark. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you're not going to do anything? Greg gave me a tight-lipped smile. I think we've reached the end of this discussion. And that was it. No fines, no warning to Linda, no consequences. Just a pat on the head and a polite shove out the door. But the final straw came when I found a letter from the HOA in my mailbox the next day. For a brief, hopeful second, I thought maybe they had actually done something. But no, it was a warning for me. Your decorative lawn features are a potential hazard to vehicles and should be reconsidered, it read. A potential hazard? My lights? Meanwhile, Linda was out there playing Grand Theft Auto with my property, and I was the one getting a warning. That's when I knew diplomacy wasn't going to work. If the HOA wasn't going to help, then I was going to have to handle this my way. If I thought Linda was inconsiderate before, now she was just plain malicious. After the HOA brushed off my complaint, she seemed to take it as permission to do whatever she wanted. Because suddenly, she wasn't just accidentally running over my lights anymore. She was doing it on purpose. The first time, I thought maybe it was just my imagination. But the security camera footage didn't lie. There she was, pulling out of her driveway, turning just enough to clip the edge of mine, and crunch, another broken light the next morning. I reviewed the footage, my blood boiling. But I still wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just a terrible driver. Maybe she didn't realize what she was doing. So, I confronted her one last time. Linda, I said, showing her the footage on my phone. This has to stop. She barely glanced at it before waving a dismissive hand. Oh, calm down. They're just lights, Mark. I clenched my jaw. They're my lights, and you're breaking them on purpose. Linda smirked, the same infuriating smirk that made me want to scream. Well, if you're dumb enough to put them there, that's not my problem. Then she had the audacity to laugh before sauntering back inside her house like she had just delivered the funniest joke in the world. That's when I knew this wasn't carelessness. This wasn't an accident. This was Linda flexing, testing how much she could get away with, knowing the HOA had her back. And now that she'd won round one, she was doubling down. The next week, she didn't just clip the lights. She gunned it. I watched in horror from my window as she deliberately swerved onto my property, the crunch of plastic and glass loud enough to make my blood boil. And as if that wasn't bad enough, she actually had the nerve to look up at my house, smirk, and wave before driving off like nothing happened. That was it. That was the moment I snapped. I wasn't just mad anymore. I was livid. Linda wanted to play dirty? Fine. Two could play that game. I spent the next few days doing research, carefully planning my next move. If Linda wanted to turn my driveway into her personal demolition derby, then she was about to find out the hard way that some things aren't meant to be run over. It was time for an upgrade. I wasn't just going to replace my driveway lights. I was going to reinforce them. Linda had made it clear that she thought this was a game, but if she wanted to play, then I was going to make sure she lost, spectacularly. I spent hours researching the toughest driveway lights money could buy. Not those flimsy plastic ones she kept crushing, but something serious, something that could take a hit and hit back. That's when I found them, industrial-grade reinforced steel bollard lights. These weren't just decorative. These were the kind of lights designed to survive actual vehicle impacts. I ordered them immediately, spending more than I should have, but at this point, it wasn't about the money. It was about justice. And just to make sure Linda couldn't accidentally move them, I took things a step further. I dug deep, filled the base with concrete, and reinforced them with steel rebar. These things weren't just lights anymore. They were immovable objects. I worked late into the night, carefully installing each one like I was laying down a trap. By the time I finished, my driveway looked no different than before, just a neat row of simple driveway lights. But I knew the truth. These weren't just lights. These were Linda-proof barriers. The next morning, I stood on my porch, sipping coffee like usual, waiting. It didn't take long. Linda came barreling out of her driveway like a wrecking ball in yoga pants. I watched as her SUV lurched toward my driveway at the same predictable angle, the same entitled carelessness. Here we go. Crunch. But this time, it wasn't the soft, pitiful sound of plastic shattering under her tires. No, this time it sounded like metal meeting metal, like something hard and unbreakable refusing to yield. Linda's SUV lurched hard to one side, the front right tire bouncing like she had just hit a curb at full speed. The sound of scraping metal followed. Something was seriously wrong. I grinned, watching as her car skidded to a stop, rocking slightly from the impact. For a moment, everything was still. Then came the best part. Linda stumbled out of her car, her face twisted in red-faced confusion, staring at her front bumper, or rather, what was left of it. The entire lower portion had snapped clean off, leaving a jagged mess of plastic and torn metal. Her front right tire was flat, the wheel well dented. The reinforced bollard light stood tall, completely unscathed. I took another sip of coffee, barely able to contain my satisfaction. Game over, Linda. Linda's reaction was everything I had hoped for and more. At first, she just stood there, blinking in stunned silence at her mangled car, like she couldn't quite process what had happened. Then the rage set in. "What the hell?" she screeched, kicking at the wrecked bumper like that was somehow going to fix it. I leaned casually against my porch railing, watching with the world's most satisfied smirk. Oh, this was going to be good. Linda whipped around, her face flushed with fury, eyes locked on me like I had personally reached out and smacked her with a steel beam. "What did you do?" she shrieked, storming toward me. I raised an eyebrow, taking another sip of coffee, deliberately calm. "Me? I didn't do anything, Linda. Looks like you hit something." Linda's eyes practically bugged out of her head. "You know damn well what I hit." She jabbed a manicured finger toward the unscathed industrial-grade driveway light. "What the hell is that?" I took a slow breath, enjoying this. "A driveway light," I said, my voice dripping with innocence. "Just like the ones you kept running over. I just upgraded them to something sturdier since you seemed to have trouble avoiding them." Linda's mouth opened and closed, her brain short-circuiting as she realized exactly what had happened. "You can't do that," she finally screamed. I tilted my head. "Why not? They're on my property. HOA rules say I can have decorative lighting as long as it's within my boundaries. And guess what? It is." Her face turned an unnatural shade of red, and for a moment, I swore she was going to explode on the spot. Instead, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her wrecked car, yanking out her phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling the HOA. You're going to pay for this, you little owl." Then she stopped. A dawning horror spread across her face as she really looked at her car. The shredded bumper, the cracked wheel well, the front right tire completely obliterated. The SUV sat tilted, its frame visibly misaligned from the force of the impact. Oh no. Linda loved that car. She loved it more than she loved being HOA royalty. And now it was ruined. And it was all her fault. I could see the gears turning in her head. If she called the HOA, she'd be admitting that she had been deliberately running over my driveway lights. She couldn't blame me for protecting my own property. But the real kicker? Her insurance. There was no way they were going to cover this when they saw the security footage. Because, oh yes, I had it all on camera. She couldn't even lie her way out of it. She was screwed. Linda let out a strangled noise, somewhere between a growl and a whimper. "This isn't over," she hissed, shoving her phone back into her pocket. But I could see it in her eyes. She knew she had lost. And damn, did that feel good. Linda had never moved so fast. She yanked open the driver's side door of her SUV, but when she tried to reverse, the car groaned in protest, the front end sagging like it had just given up on life. Oh yeah, I thought. She really didn't see that coming. Linda's expression twisted as she realized she wasn't going anywhere. The damage was bad, way worse than she'd expected. The right front tire was completely destroyed, the bumper was half detached and scraping against the ground, and the alignment was shot. If she tried to drive it, she'd probably do even more damage. With a furious growl, she grabbed her phone and stormed down the driveway, muttering under her breath. I took another sip of coffee, barely able to contain my absolute joy. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Linda called for a tow truck. She tried to keep her voice low, but I could still hear bits and pieces. "Yes, it's undrivable. No, I don't know what happened. No, it's not my fault." That last part made me snort. "Sure, Linda. Whatever helps you sleep at night." The tow truck arrived within the hour, and Linda's humiliation was put on full display for the entire neighborhood. A small crowd of nosy neighbors had gathered on their porches, watching with barely contained amusement as the tow truck driver inspected the wreck. The guy let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered, shaking his head as he crouched down. "You hit a curb at full speed or something?" Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "It was a hazard," she snapped, throwing a murderous glare at me. "A trap." The tow truck driver glanced at me, then at the completely intact driveway lights, then back at Linda's SUV. He raised an eyebrow. Uh-huh. Linda huffed and turned away, arms crossed like a spoiled toddler. I, meanwhile, just smiled and waved as the tow truck driver hooked up her car. Better be careful backing out next time, Linda, I called cheerfully. Her eyes blazed with fury, but she couldn't say a damn thing without incriminating herself. The neighbors were eating this up. I could hear whispers and quiet laughter from a few houses down, and I knew word was going to spread fast. Linda, the HOA queen, had wrecked her own car on someone else's driveway lights. Oh, people were going to talk. But as sweet as this moment was, things got even better when Linda finally made her move. She stomped straight to the HOA office, probably thinking she could twist the situation in her favor. But I was ready for this. Before she even had the chance to file a complaint, I sent an email to the entire HOA board with video evidence attached, a beautiful, crystal-clear recording of Linda deliberately running over my driveway lights multiple times, proving she had done this to herself. I made sure to CC every single important person in the neighborhood too, just to make sure the truth stuck. So when Linda marched into that meeting, expecting to play the victim, she was met with a room full of people who already knew exactly what had happened. Linda marched into the HOA office like a woman on a mission, fully expecting the board to rally behind her, rain hellfire down on me, and demand I remove my hazardous driveway lights immediately. But the moment she stepped in, she realized something was very wrong. The board members weren't nodding in agreement or fawning over her like usual. Instead, they were sitting stiffly, some avoiding eye contact, others looking genuinely pissed off. And right in the center of the table, my email, printed out, with still shots from the security footage. Linda's smug confidence wavered. I need to file a complaint, she started. But before she could launch into her usual dramatic performance, Greg, the HOA president who normally kissed the ground she walked on, held up a hand. Linda, he said, his voice unusually stern. Before you say another word, do you have any idea what kind of mess you've created? Linda blinked, caught off guard. Mess? I'm the victim here. That jerk Mark set up a trap to destroy my car. Greg sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Linda, we have video evidence of you repeatedly running over Mark's property, deliberately. The blood drained from Linda's face. It wasn't. Save it. Another board member cut in, waving the papers in front of her. Do you realize what you've done? You've been knowingly damaging someone else's property for months, and now that it's finally backfired on you, you want us to fix it. Linda's jaw tightened. This is your fault too, she snapped, pointing wildly at Greg. You told Mark to compromise instead of making him move his stupid lights. If you had handled it properly, I wouldn't be in this situation. Greg's face went red, and for the first time in history, the HOA turned on Linda. No, Linda, Greg said coldly. You put yourself in this situation. You ignored property boundaries, disregarded HOA guidelines, and then had the nerve to demand special treatment. You're lucky Mark didn't press criminal charges for property damage. Linda visibly flinched at the words, criminal charges. Her mouth snapped shut. As of now, Greg continued, slamming a document onto the table, you're officially fined $5,000 for repeated destruction of property and reckless driving within the neighborhood. Linda's entire body stiffened. What? Oh, and one more thing. Another board member chimed in, flipping through some paperwork. We reviewed the HOA's finances recently, and a lot of expenses were flagged as Linda's personal projects. Turns out, you've been using HOA funds for your own landscaping upgrades. And what was it? Golf club memberships. The room fell dead silent. Linda looked like she was going to faint. That's not. We'll be conducting a full audit, the board member continued. And if anything else comes up, well, that's between you and legal counsel. Linda stood there, stunned, her face frozen in absolute horror. The people she had counted on to protect her were done with her. I, meanwhile, just sat back and watched the absolute destruction of Linda's empire unfold. I couldn't have planned it better myself. Linda stood there, stunned into silence, her face shifting between rage, shock, and pure panic as the reality of the situation settled in. The HOA wasn't her shield anymore. The people she had bullied, manipulated, and controlled for years were turning their backs on her. But I was loving every second of it. You can't fine me $5,000. Linda finally spat, her voice teetering on hysteria. That's ridiculous. I'll fight this. Greg sighed. rubbing his temples like he genuinely regretted ever siding with her in the past. Linda, we have security footage, financial records, and multiple complaints against you. You're not winning this. If you refuse to pay the fine, we'll escalate this to legal action. The color drained from her face. Legal action, meaning lawyers, meaning lawsuits, meaning potential criminal charges for misusing HOA funds. Linda lived in this neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom, but now she looked like a cornered animal. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she had no smart-ass comeback. And damn, did that feel good. You have until the end of the month, Greg added, tapping the fine notice in front of her. After that, things are going to get a whole lot worse for you. Linda snatched the paper off the table like it personally offended her, crumpling it in her fists. She turned sharply on her heel, storming out of the HOA office like a tornado of fury. But there was no commanding presence anymore, no entitled swagger. Just pure defeat. I stood up, stretching like this had been just another casual Tuesday afternoon, and nodded to the board. Pleasure doing business with you. Greg gave me a tired look. Just keep the peace, all right? I smirked. I always do. When I stepped outside, the moment got even better. Linda was furiously talking to the tow truck driver, who was now telling her the full extent of her car's damage. Lady, I don't know how you did it, but your axle's messed up. That's not a cheap fix. Linda's nostrils flared. How much? A couple thousand. Maybe more. And that's if your insurance covers it. Linda's face was priceless. Between the $5,000 fine and a completely wrecked SUV, she was going to be hurting. And the best part? I had done absolutely nothing illegal. Just a little creative problem solving. I walked past her slowly, making damn sure to meet her eyes, and with a big, satisfied grin, I said, maybe next time, Linda, just stay in your own damn driveway. And with that, I went home, victorious. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt peaceful. No more Linda strutting around like a self-appointed queen. No more HOA bending to her every whim. No more driveway lights being turned into roadkill just because she thought she could. I woke up the next morning and stepped onto my porch with my coffee, letting the quiet sink in. Damn, that felt good. Linda, on the other hand, was spiraling. The fallout from her reckless behavior hit her harder than her SUV had hit that industrial-grade bollard. She had no car, a massive fine, and a legal investigation breathing down her neck for all the HOA funds she had mysteriously redirected to her personal projects. And people were talking. Oh, they were talking. The same neighbors who once tolerated her nonsense were now openly mocking her. Guess you should have just stayed in your lane, Linda. One of the older ladies snickered as she passed by Linda's house. Linda's fuming expression told me everything I needed to know. She had lost her power over the neighborhood. She tried to file a counter-complaint against me, claiming I had intentionally set up a hazard to damage her car. But guess what? The HOA laughed her out of the office. They had already seen the footage. They knew she had been targeting my driveway for months. She had zero ground to stand on, and the HOA wasn't about to stick their necks out for her now. She even called her insurance company, hoping they'd cover the thousands of dollars in damages. That conversation did not go well, because when they pulled the footage I had conveniently sent them, they denied her claim outright. Turns out, willfully running over someone's property isn't exactly something insurance companies are keen on covering. That meant the entire cost of repairs came straight out of Linda's pocket. And the best part? Her SUV was still in the shop, meaning, for the first time ever, Linda had to walk her entitled self down the street like the rest of the peasants. She tried to keep her usual attitude, walking around like she still owned the place, but no one was buying it anymore. The power, the influence, gone. And I was thriving. Not only was my driveway completely untouched for the first time in forever, but I had also become a local legend. Neighbors who had never spoken to me before were now cheerfully waving at me. Some even dropped by to say, "That was some damn fine work." One guy even jokingly said, "I need to install some of those lights myself, just in case." And Linda? Well, let's just say she never went near my driveway again. As the weeks passed, Linda's downfall became the neighborhood's favorite story, a cautionary tale about what happens when entitlement meets immovable justice. I had one. And the best part? I hadn't even needed to break a single rule to do it. My driveway remained perfectly intact, my industrial-grade lights standing proud, untouched. The HOA, now desperate to clean up its reputation, started enforcing rules fairly for once, probably to avoid another scandal. And Linda? Oh, Linda had been permanently dethroned. Her once unshakable influence over the HOA was gone. And without her precious SUV, she was just another neighbor. No power, no control, no special treatment. She tried to keep up appearances, walking stiffly through the neighborhood like she hadn't just been publicly humiliated. But the shift was undeniable. People who once pretended to tolerate her nonsense now openly ignored her. Conversation stopped when she walked by. No more fake smiles. No more whispered gossip about who Linda would go after next. She wasn't a threat anymore. She was just there. And that was worse than any fine she could have been given. But the final nail in the coffin? She put her house up for sale. I nearly spit out my coffee when I saw the sign in her yard one morning. Linda was leaving. I had actually driven her out. I kept an eye on the moving process, watching with pure satisfaction as she grudgingly packed up her over-decorated monstrosity of a home. The for sale sign stood like a trophy, proof that justice had been served. On her last day, as she loaded the final boxes into a rental car, because her SUV was still in the shop, she turned and glared at my house one last time. I stepped onto my porch, lifted my coffee, and gave her the biggest, most satisfied wave imaginable. Linda's eye twitched, but she didn't say a word. She just turned back around, got in her car, and drove out of the neighborhood for good. And just like that, she was gone. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. People actually celebrated. Neighbors joked about having a Linda-free block party. The HOA, now rid of their most toxic member, even relaxed some of their ridiculous rules. But most importantly, I had my peace. No more HOA threats. No more passive-aggressive letters. No more driveway lights getting crushed by a self-important nightmare of a neighbor. I had won. Completely. And the best part? I had done it without breaking a single rule. As I sat back on my porch, sipping my coffee in the peaceful, Linda-free morning, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes, karma just needs a little encouragement. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.